Welcome to this episode of What I Want to Show You. I'm Char. I'm a teacher, administrator, and education leader who lives in the United States along the shore of Lake Erie near Cleveland, Ohio. And I'm passionate about making learning connections where others may not see them in order to close learning gaps and support all learners. One of those connections was how to use generative AI like ChatGPT in the world of education, and that is how I met my friend and colleague, Laura.
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm from Cape Town, South Africa. I have been involved in education in various forms for many years. And while I no longer work in education, I'm still passionate about education and the possibilities that technology offers us for equity in education, especially generative AI in recent times. And of course, that's how I met Char.
So today we thought we would talk about a word that has been on both of our minds over the past few weeks, and that word is augmented. So I started thinking about augmented, Laura, because I've been talking to people about what are the tools and resources that are available now that can help to expand their capabilities or to complement the skills that they have, or fill in gaps, or help them to solve problems in ways they wouldn't be able to do it without that support. And so it's something that's really like noodled around in my head. Like, what does augmented look like if you are a person? What does augmented look like if you're a teacher? What does augmented look like if you're a learner? And I've been working on some positive language around that. Like, if you're an augmented learner, you have the ability to use tech tools like generative AI tools to help you grow your own learning, or poke at you so that you recognize blind spots or gaps in your thinking, or it helps you see things from the perspective of others, which on your own is impossible to do. You know, you can never, the best you can do at seeing yourself is looking in a mirror. And if you look in a mirror, you aren't actually seeing yourself in the way that you, from inside of you, would be seeing yourself. So that idea that augmented learning can use tools to help you see your learning from different angles and from other people's perspectives, I think is really powerful. How have you been thinking about augmented?
Well, actually, you've sparked some new thoughts, but I've been hearing a lot of people over the past few weeks saying, AI is going to make us stupid. It's going to de-skill us. We're not going to think for ourselves. We're not going to write anything for ourselves, which it hasn't been true for me. I do use it on a daily basis, but I don't let it write my posts for me. I don't let it do my thinking for me. I was just telling you before we started here that I went away for the weekend, and I was looking at the mountains, and they have these really interesting rock formations, these layers of different colored rocks. Whereas normally I would have thought, oh, pretty rocks. I took a photo, and when I got home to connectivity, I asked AI to please explain to me how the rocks had formed, what different kinds they were, and just generally how the geology of the rocks accounted for the appearance. And I wouldn't have done that before. It's expanding my horizons. I have asked it how to do certain things that before I would have just been content not to do, or I would have paid somebody else to do little DIY projects, because I wouldn't have had the ability to necessarily find the information. Because it's Googling is not like asking a question. You've got to know what you're looking for. And if you don't, and you don't know what something is called, it's really difficult to find the right information. So I feel like an augmented human. Also, there are things that I've thought of, looked at, researched, that, and then I forget a little bit of it, and I want a refresher. And then I can ask a targeted question. I don't have to go and read an entire textbook over again. I can just go, oh yes, that was the detail. So that's what I've been thinking about most recently as it's the calculator, the printing press all over again. It's
Well, and
giving us new skills.
I think the big difference in the calculator and the printing press is that those are assistant to technology, right? The calculator can assist you in doing your math and can help you do it more efficiently because you don't have to remember all of the facts in your head anymore. You just have to remember the order of operations to acquire that information. And I think the next step up is that in generative AI, you can say, I have this problem, I'm not sure what to do with it. And it will talk you through and annotate how to solve the problem and give you the answer. Calculators will give you an answer, but you still have to know what you're inputting into that calculator and then be able to decide if it's accurate. Generative AI will help you with what you should be inputting to get an outcome. You still need to know if it's accurate or not, or reasonable at least. But I do think it's kind of a next step technology for that. But you spark, I mean, we can talk for hours and hours because we spark ideas in each other's heads. But I liked what you said about you saw this thing when you were disconnected and you wondered about it and felt free to wonder about it because you had a tool that was going to help answer some of those questions that you were wondering about. You were able to come back and without knowing anything, put a picture into a generative AI system and say, talk to me about what was going on in these rock layers. And it could do it in a way that you could understand. And I'm guessing it sparked new questions for you too, and some more wondering. And isn't that, after all, what makes life interesting for us at this point? Like, if you stop wondering about things, you feel that you don't have any resources to answer questions that you have, then maybe you stop asking questions and you stop wondering. And then life gets awfully boring and doesn't feel quite as fulfilling. So that idea that you can be an augmented person in that it's a resource that helps you to wonder and continue wondering, I think is very exciting.
I think you made a very good point when you said an assistant, because I think that's how you need to see it in order for it to be an augmentation and not take over. When I said the printing press, people said that everybody there was this fear that people would no longer know how to write. And that was an important skill. But what I think is obviously, things can be used. I think the printing press was also used for nefarious purposes and spreading propaganda and so on. So things can be used badly, and not only for nefarious purposes, but also just to de-skill, right? And to replace certain skills and people and so on. But our skill sets also evolve as we have more tools. And yes, it's a next step. And yes, you can delegate everything to it, but it can also augment us. I think it's using it as an assistant and a tool instead of just delegating everything to it, I think is the key. So using it as an augmentation, also our skill sets evolve. So I think that it's also going to bring about new skills. I think it already has. So for example, I'm not going to say that supermarkets have made me less skilled, although they have in a way, because I can no longer forage. I don't know what berries and roots are safe to eat. I was thinking, being out where I was away from civilization, I thought if I was to be stuck here right now, I would have nothing to eat, because I don't, it's not really something you want to try with trial and error, because an error could cost you quite dearly. It might be the last thing you ever try.
Right.
So I believe that there will be skills beyond prompt engineering, which is becoming less and less important as the models get more sophisticated, that we will develop. And then there's always this, with every new invention, there's this fear and there's this, and then something else comes into play. It makes more things possible, which pushes us as humanity further. That's my utopian view of this anyway.
Well, going back to the printing press, you were right that that technology allowed more propaganda to be more widely dispersed. And it also encouraged more people to learn how to read, because up until that point, reading and writing were skills that came with wealth or privilege, or were associated with the church, depending on where you were in at least the European world. And reading was not something that was widely accessible to people because books were expensive. They had to be handwritten and hand assembled. And you needed a skilled person as a scribe to write those books. And because of the printing press, it became efficient and cheap to produce large amounts of printed material. And because it had to have a fixed typeset, it standardized printing and letter formation in a way that made that reading and writing, again, more accessible for more people. So when we think about how it spread not only misinformation, but also the right information and the right knowledge, and made that kind of learning and entertainment available to so many more people. Then I think about generative AI and being augmented, and what are the new skills that will come as a result of that, and what broader group of people have the potential to have broader experiences in life because of the capacity of generative AI to be an assistant and augment them. You talked about, well, I feel like I can take on some tasks now because I can use generative AI to explain to me what I should be doing in a way that makes sense to me, and give me examples that will make sense to me, and annotate the steps I need to follow that make sense to me, so that I can do that. And I don't have to know already the vocabulary to search Google to find something, because I can say, this is a problem I have to have. What words do I need to know in order to do this? Teach me those words. What steps will I need to follow? Explain those steps. What tools would I need? I don't know what that is. Tell me what that is. Then you can go to Google, because now you do have the knowledge and skills that you need to find the manufacturer of that tool, or the part, or the resource that you're looking for. So, I think when we're talking about being augmented, it can augment our knowledge and experiences, much the way access to a broader range of printed materials did for people when the printing press came on the scene.
Yeah, I think it augments, as you said, not only us, but our experiences. There's just so much more that we can imagine. You spoke about augmented reality in your blog post, and I was thinking of the stargazing that we did. And then of course we have this app that you point your phone at the sky, and it'll sort of annotate the sky for you, and that just enriches the experience so much. I mean, it's not just generative AI, it's AI in general. Our world is becoming richer. If you're looking at a big bright dot, and that's fantastic. I'm very big in stargazing, but if I know that it's Jupiter and the three little dots next to it are its moons, then it just blows my mind.
Right. And then you start to wonder more about it. And it's like, okay, well, now I know what that is. Maybe I'm more interested in that. I remember reading this article about Jupiter's moons, and that was interesting. I'd like to learn more about that. Like, I think that embedding of AI into apps, into the things we're interacting with, frees up the space for us to dig deeper into things that are interesting to us. I had that same experience a few years ago. The Cleveland Museum of Art started a new gallery, and it used QR codes, which at the time, QR codes were a new thing. It was like, oh, what is this thing? It's this little dot pattern, and I can scan it with my phone and it's going to tell me something that I didn't know. So it was this interactive gallery, and they had QR codes that were at each of the pieces of artwork or the sculptures. And depending on what it was, sometimes it opened up the image that was behind the painting so that you could see, like, here's what this painting is that you see. But what we have found through our work is that below it was a completely different painting, or the artist had a completely different idea. And here now you can actually see through this painting and see it while you're standing in front of it. And in other examples, it was a curator talking about the sculpture's technique. And if you look closely here, you can see these chisel lines. And what that tells you is this. And here, this is what it started as. And so as you went through the gallery, not only could you enjoy the art as the art in front of you, but it wasn't the little tag with the typed out, this painting was painted in 1642 and represents, Mr. Smith and his wife in their manor estate, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no one reads those anymore. Like, people walk past those, or you kind of look at the title and move on. Instead, when you scan it, it was like, and here's the picture of the estate. And at the time, the Smiths were this, and this is what it would have looked like in their time period. And the reason why they're pictured with these objects is because they represented these things. And here's this thing explaining it to you. It was so much more engaging. So you experienced that gallery, and you turned your equipment back in, because at that time, your cell phone could not scan QR codes. You needed the special device, and you put your little headset on, and right. But then I went to the other galleries, and I love the museum. I spend a lot of time in the museum. That's someplace that we've always enjoyed going. And I was like, where is that? Like, ooh, this is one of my favorite paintings. I would so like to know more about it. Like, what else is going on in this painting? I wish that it had the QR code on it, that I could listen to it. And I think that's when I first had that augmented experience. Like, what did it feel like to be an augmented visitor to an art museum? Well, as an augmented visitor, I had a completely different experience with the art. I was engaging with the art and listening and thinking about what the artist's brain was thinking when it created it, or what was going on in the world at the time this was painted. All that wondering, versus walking through the gallery and like, oh, I love this painting. I always like the expression on her face. I like these colors. That's interesting. I like this style, No, it was a whole different experience. And I think if we think about what AI's capacity is, as you said, not just generative AI, but kind of the virtual space and the augmented space, how much more enriching our lives can be as a result of that, and the kinds of conversations we could have with other people because of that, and the new ideas that we might have because of that ability to see things in such a different way. I think that's what's so exciting, and why it's so bothersome to me that, as in all new technology, the knee-jerk response out of the gate is no. I don't know. What are your
It bothers me. It bothers me terribly. But at the same time, it gives me pause, because well enough that I worry about equity in education, right? It's my thing.
That is your passion.
Yeah. So, well, one of them. So I worry because I see so much poverty, and the needs are so great, right? If we look at Maslow's hierarchy, there's kids who still don't have food for 3 days at a stretch, or areas where where sanitary products for women are considered luxuries. Connectivity is not, I mean, it's a pipe dream, to be honest, in large parts of Africa in general, not just South Africa. And I feel like children who are raised without, I mean, generative AI, not even to mention things like augmented reality and VR is just unheard of. Virtual reality is so expensive right now. So you have kids in private schools who are experiencing all of these things, and then you have kids who don't even have desks or textbooks or running water or flushing toilets at their schools, and it feels to me like the divide is getting even bigger, because what it can do is incredible, but so I feel like what it is doing for the kids who have it is incredible, but what it's doing for the kids who haven't, they'll never catch up. I mean, already they won't catch up, but now they will be so far behind. So we're ushering in a new era, and they will be so completely ill-equipped to participate in it, and it will isolate these communities even more and just totally bar them access to this new world.
So along that line, it makes me wonder, what can we do to shift the thinking around how we can augment things and how we can use generative AI to solve problems that we can't solve on our own? And one of those problems is, how do we close that connectivity gap so that children who live in spaces where they don't have that kind of access are not left behind and outpaced by their peers who do? So one of those strategies might be to start to put those problems in front of the peers who do and say, look, you have these resources available to you right now that may be useful to you in figuring out solutions to problems that currently we have not been able to solve. Use that technology to close the gap for your peers who do not have that. Like, how can we do that? Because I think there's got to be solutions. Like, we can't just as a world say, well, it's just going to be this way. Sorry, based on where you live right now, too bad for you. This is the way it's going to be for you. There are massive problems in our world, in climate, in politics, in tech gaps, in learning gaps, in healthcare gaps, massive gaps. And these problems are only going to get worse. And so for areas where there is that access and those skills, these are the problems that we should be putting in front of those people, saying, hey, you have tools here that we could be thinking about differently and using differently that may help us solve these global problems, so that we don't wind up with entire continents of people who are going to be dramatically impacted by climate shift. We're already seeing it, significant drought, failed crops, massive flooding, coastal deterioration, massive weather shifting, along with we don't have access to the internet. We don't have access to regular power. We don't have safe drinking water. We don't have any of these things. Like, how do we take those problems and put them in front of today's children to have them start solving them? Because there are adults who are committed to that, but there are certainly adults who aren't. And I have a lot of confidence in children. I have seen what children can do if you give them the opportunity and the resources to do it. So maybe that's my pie in the sky view, that the reason why we need to help children see the potential to be augmented individuals and what they can do with these tools is because we as adults can't. And maybe the children need to. And so if we put policies in place that block our children from using these tools, and we don't present them with learning opportunities where they can actually see and connect to these real world, in the moment, these are going to impact you problems, and encourage them to start solving them, I do fear that that gap will just continue to grow.
Yes, we don't want, I mean, that gap is terrible, but we need to equip as many children as we can with the skills to address them. And as you say, yes, we do. But the thing is it feels, sometimes it feels insurmountable. What we did in South Africa during lockdown, when there was so little, well, of everything, you know, and people weren't having incomes, and the food banks just weren't coping, is they partnered up communities. So you had a wealthier community share their resources with a poorer community. And that worked beautifully because, you know, the whole country's putting together. But in a country like the DRC, for example, or the Central African Republic, you just don't have enough. There just isn't enough to, you're going to have poor communities partner with poor communities, because, I mean, when you have millions of people, say, in refugee camps as well, and in other countries, or you have civil war, or you have, there's just, it just feels like maybe this is because I'm older, and I find generally everything that's going on really overwhelming and exhausting, because it does feel like the world is kind of burning right now. But it's just, it feels insurmountable. We're talking about millions of people who, for whom devices are really low down on the list, because survival is really first. And I'm not just talking about survival because you don't have food to eat. I'm talking about survival because you're going to get, you know, even if we don't talk about countries who are actually at war, we talk about countries who where there's just lawlessness and gangsterism, and, like I said, refugees, and it just feels like there's so much. And then it's not only connectivity, but devices. And then you have communities where you can't have a device because it will make you a target, even here in South Africa. So I spoke to somebody whose grandson had been given a device. He had it for a week before it was stolen. And the person it was stolen by was not somebody he knew who'd stolen it, because you do know, but it was not somebody he was going to confront, because it would put him in danger. It's how do you deal with something like that? You can provide connectivity, but then what do you do? What do you do about that?
I feel that same, the positive side of me always looks for positive possibilities. That's where I land. I've worked hard at that, but I share that too, Laura. You know, I've felt that way over the past weeks, that as I watch pieces land in place, and because I pay attention to those things and I'm looking out, I'm not just looking in or within a small little space, it does feel insurmountable, because the sheer volume of people that are being faced with climate challenges, violence, food inequity, technology inequities, financial crisis, war, is overwhelming. It
Mm.
truly is. You know, when it's like, well, I'm just not going to watch the news tonight. This is just not what I'm going to do. I'm going to sit and read a book and do a craft project, but it is overwhelming. And I think the only approach to that you can take as a person, as a single person, is to have as much influence as you can on the things that you can influence. And maybe that's why I've spent so much time in my spheres of influence advocating for high quality instructional materials, you know, supporting teachers to give kids the best opportunities they can to be readers and math thinkers and science students, and to have access to tech tools and not limit them. Because that at least is a sphere of influence that I can see an impact in. And I have to believe that within that, out of all of the children and the adults that I can influence, maybe one or two of them will be a leader that works for diplomacy, that leads a company that values the climate and the environment in our space. That's how I continue. Maybe that's the positive augmented me, that I just have to keep looking at that. And your work is important too. Your voice and how you're choosing to use your voice right now, to bring to the front the positives of all individuals, and why acknowledging that everyone has value and brings value to the table is so important. And how do you structure your space and your opportunities to be sure that everyone can, is equally important work, I think, in this feeling of there are so many things that we have no control over and what is going to happen in our world. You know, that's, I think, where you've chosen to be a more positive, augmented person.
Also to just use AI, not to support, so that people can be the best version of themselves. So not to augment, but just to, I don't know, does that count as augmenting? Not really. Augmenting your environment more, and your task. Yeah.
It's a
So
compliment. It's complimenting you, or
no,
giving
no,
you
no.
things that you didn't have as augmented. That's how I think about it.
So I understand that. So what you and I do, I think that we both care a lot about making as much of an impact as we can. It's just that, and that does bring me fulfillment and purpose and all of those things. But I can't help, I've got this little niggly voice that says to me, what about, so you're doing your little thing in your little patch, but what about the kids in the townships who don't even have running water? What about the children in refugee camps in Kenya right now because they're fleeing from their own countries? What about people who are just trying to survive from day to day? And I know we can only do the best we can, and we can use AI to be the best versions of ourselves and have as much impact as possible. But I can't shake it. I can't shake. I feel like there must be something, like a magic switch somewhere. I think I'm rambling, but
no, that would just like say, here you go,
yes.
everyone. Here's this.
Yes.
Well, I mean, that's where political advocacy comes in, because ultimately we already have the capacity to make that happen as a global society.
As a global society, we just need to have the right.
We do. We're choosing not to. we're putting effort and money and time and resources to other things.
And often the worst things.
Right. But we already have the capacity to solve those problems.
All of them. All of
All
them.
of them.
I just wish
We
I wish
aren't.
we could.
We choose to not. And that goes back to advocacy and supporting the voices that are pushing for those things, because
I wish I could arrange a Damascus moment for Elon Musk so that he can use all his billions for that.
yes, right. It's you've got all these, you have all this money, and it's like, what could we do? Going back to what you were talking about during the pandemic, where communities were helping other communities, where you see, I have this resource or this skill, and I can use it to benefit you, and I'm choosing to do that because it's the right thing to do. What does that look like at a global level in a world currently that seems to be moving further from that? It across multiple nations, moving further away from let's help each other and let's pool our resources on a global level to band together to survive in this space that is changing right out from under us. But we're not. So that isn't a problem you and I are going to solve on a podcast or in our life. But I hear you and I honor that, because I think many people must feel this way. And it's like, if we elevate our voices enough, and I have to hope that we're the majority. Like, how is it that you as a majority can shift conversations where the minority who has the power and the resources is making decisions? That there's a whole bigger can of worms that we're not going to talk about today, but I think that's where you're going. That yes, we can do in our spaces our things, and yes, we can elevate those and have a broader reach, but at what point do you push from below those voices who believe that up and support those voices to the point where those kinds of global decisions can be made?
I'm trying to stay positive, but it is difficult not to become jaded, not to just lose hope, because especially when you feel like you've been trying to push and nobody's listening. We have in South Africa, or we had at least, the highest per capita protest rate in the world. And yet, here we are. And I just don't know how to make people listen. How do we actually make large scale change happen? Because incremental change is well and good, but we're going to need, if we are to fix climate change and food insecurity, we're going to need something a little bit bigger than that.
Well, it's a disruption, that I think generative AI and AI itself has the capacity to cause that level of disruption, potentially. But right now, it's going in the opposite direction, because it's being used to perpetuate some of the negative messaging and the negative work that's going on. And we've seen the power of it. So it's like, okay, well, how do we take that back so that the power of AI is perpetuating a different message and encouraging that inclusivity? Because currently the people who are the most successful at using its potential for that are not using it for the good of mankind. So wrapping up our blog today, because you and I could talk about this for like 5 hours or 50 hours. You know, when we talk about seeing things and sharing things that we see at this crossroads, you and I live in very different spaces. You are much closer to some of the things we've talked about than I am. And that's part of why I appreciate having you as a friend and in my network, because when I look out my window, what I see isn't large amounts of refugees who are seeking refuge, who don't have the education skills that they need to be successful in the place that they're coming. There are refugees in my area. We have support networks in place for them. We help them build those educational skills. I'm not seeing large numbers of people who are unhomed in the communities that I live in. You know, I have access to regular safe drinking water and regular electricity that's relatively dependable. Although it went out last night in the middle of the night. But like, my part of my daily life isn't thinking, am I going to have electricity today and for how many hours? Like, I don't live that world. And so I appreciate your perspective, because you are in a world where you're bumping up against that more often than me. And you know, just like generative AI can augment your perspective and give you different points of view and poke at you and help you identify blind spots, I can't help it that I have blind spots related to those things, because that's not been my lived experience, nor is it something that I have regular experience with firsthand. So I appreciate you, because you shift my perspective and push at my thinking on how all of these pieces like fit together on a global perspective. So thank you for that in our podcast today and most days. Like, thanks for doing that.
Well, I mean, you have legislative challenges that I don't, so I get that from you. Book censorship and so on. We don't really have that. So I think that, you know what is, yes, AI augments us, but we augment each other.
Absolutely. And maybe that's a good note to end on.
I think so.
Having a network that augments you, that isn't just a technology network, maybe is the most important message from today's conversation.
I think so. We can all augment each other.
So thanks for joining us today. We know that there's so much more to see than what we've shared, and certainly more to talk about. We'd love for you to show us what you see, or use our conversation today as an opportunity to share what you see with others. Thank you, Laura, for your time today.
Thank you, Char, and everybody who's listening.